Telegrams that you knew the contents of before you opened them. Places that seem familiar, though you've never been in them before.
The occult, which is the hidden, the unknown, has been with us since the cave.
Do this to manifest abundance. Do such and such to attract your soulmate. These statements solicit the principle of spiritual manifestation. But this is not a lighthearted subject. This is a profound subject that tends to only be commented on in depth by occultism. So instead of superficially glancing at this subject or nodding towards it for online credo, let's do something a little bit less popular. Let's divulge the many subjects surrounding spiritual manifestation in the occult and the theosophical traditions. So towards that aim, we are going to explain, we are going to explore the terms associated with this manifestation. But this will not be a proselytization. This won't be a strict initiation of these more arcane practices. We are going to explore this subject matter in order to come to a much more subtle wisdom about this subject, a much more earned and nuanced wisdom about this subject. So let's explore the undermentioned realm of spiritual manifestation. Let's begin by introducing a question. What is a thought? When you say you're thinking, what is happening? If an idea occurs to you, where do those ideas come from? Most relevantly speaking, does thought have a substance? Does it exist somewhere, potentially somewhere that's not simply the brain? A very passive glance through theosophical literature would inform us as to how they deal with this subject. There is the mental realm, the Buddhic plane, the astral plane, so forth. This is to say that they distinguish the types of thoughts that occur to us. If I have an intellectual thought, I have some intellectual fancy, this is believed to have a mental substance about it. It comes from the mental plane, so to speak. If I instead think and concentrate on an object, I picture it in my mind and I attempt to get as much detail as possible. This is believed to come from my mental body. If I instead have a unselfish urge or I experience a sort of mystic beauty, we could say this comes from the Buddhic plane. Accordingly, our thoughts and our feelings are believed to be sourced from somewhere. Distinctive places somewhere. We'll be teasing out this way of thinking, but it's worthy of pointing out right away that this is not distinctly occult or theosophical. If I think on good things, this is from the heavens, as though an angel is speaking to me. If I think of dark things, then this is sourced in the demonic. So if I brood versus if I feel gracious, these are believed to be sourced from two different inspirations, the devil on the shoulder or the angel on the shoulder. In truth, though, life is more complex than that. Life is a cornucopia of abstract, complex sensations and emotions. There's great relief in crying and tears, and there's a sense of coolness about dread. But what if these sensations, these specific feelings, could be made into form, that we could illustrate through picture, through depiction, the true essence, the true spirit of this feeling. These are thought forms. If enough of us get together and try to meditate on, try to work out what these feelings look like, or specifically, how we can solicit these feelings through art. This is where we can choose to categorize. Is happiness pink? Is dread a darker hue? These choices, these intuitions as to their appearance come about naturally. But this is just an introduction to the field that we have yet to explore here, these thought forms. But before moving on, we should reflect on this and to consider the expanse of what we have felt. I know that's overwhelming, but to consider the circus, the absolute buffet of thoughts that have crossed our minds, of emotions that we've felt. In this space, we shouldn't think of our thoughts as purely logical. We should think of our thoughts as rooted in spirit or emotion. If I think, hey, I should get them this present, this makes me think of them. This form of the present, this thought to do so, is irrelevant because that emotion or that spirit or that form is kindness. If I think instead that I deserve more from life, I think I should have more money, or I think I should have more things, or I think that I should get more than this person has. This is rooted from somewhere very different. But each of these places that I've sourced these feelings from, depending on what era, would be named after deities. If I feel that beauty and I feel that kindness, we could call this Aphrodite, we could call this Isis. If I feel instead that drive, that testosterone-fueled emotion, then I could call this Mars or Aries or potentially Jupiter. This is our introduction into thinking like the ancients. There are sources for these emotions that we experience. The gods are not some anthropomorphic deity outside, somewhere hidden in the air. They are actually felt sensations that we experience daily. What God we serve is the emotion that we serve. What we are devoted to is what we wish to instill in ourselves. But this way of thinking and this introduction to thought forms is just the base of our operations here. So let's move on for now and talk about Tolpas. We ought to slowly come to define this term. This term and this concept comes from Tibetan Buddhism. In order to release oneself from attachments or to live out desires or to separate oneself from their phobias, it might be advantageous to create a different persona or to, quote, imagine a different person within yourself. This alternative self that you can benefit from. So that alternative self can live out that personality trait, and then you get to learn from that personality and benefit from its path. So here, you are using thought to create personality or to create a person. The best way that this can immediately translate to the West is to say an imaginary friend. This imaginary friend that the child may create seems to come about their own autonomy, seems to come about their own ideas of themselves. In this way, it appears to be uncanny because that tulpa, or that alternate self, seems to be gaining some degree of sentience. And in the Tibetan tradition, there are these more mystical stories of those who had the greatest discipline beginning to manifest these tulpas in body. But it's worthy of stressing that here in its original culture, in its original doctrine, it is toward the aim of discipline. It's toward the aim of upaya, of letting go of attachments. Whereas the orientation, the motivation, and the fascination in the subject is much different when it gets introduced to the West in the early 1900s and comes to be a part of the theosophical and occult tradition. One might see the benefit of creating an inner persona that has a lot of courage or that doesn't fear that thing that strikes you down so readily. And in that case, you could so easily switch into this other personality or this other sentience in order to benefit from that different orientation. One might naturally begin to question the nature of self if one can fracture into different selves so readily, or who is in control of the body, so forth, this kind of dialogue. But I want to point out something that I believe should be very obvious about this whole subject matter, and that is that this tulpamancy in Buddhism must have been inspired from Bonpo shamanism, that Bonpo shamanism that preceded Buddhism's introduction in Tibet. And within shamanism, there is the practice of familiars or of spirit animals, these different personas that you come to gain relationship with, that you benefit from. This is the spirit travel or the skin walking. This is dancing the animals. This is living out their innate characteristics, but still maintaining your default over the body. Shamans would have their medicine or would have their dedicated different animal spirits that would contribute to the healing, the wisdom, and the ritual of the shaman. These spirit guides would be autonomous by perception. They would be of themselves somewhere else, but accessible to the person, viewed to be independently existing in a different realm of being. Whereas, when this comes to be embraced by the West in tulpamancy, it tends to be thought of as something that is locale to the body, or potentially teasing that multiple personality disorder kind of mind. This is to say that the orientation of the culture variates this subject substantially, whether it comes across as foreign, exotic, strange, scary, or just run-of-the-mill. The shaman's various tulpas would be embodied by the animals that carry that name, meaning that it's not just simply something that's accessed in trance states. You can gain a relationship with this tulpa, with this animal spirit, because they will occur in your world. Say deer is a part of my medicine, then the deer's appearance would be a forming of that archetype, would be a budding out from that source. So this is to say that the tulpa, or the initiating inspiration for tulpamancy, is fundamentally different in its orientation than it would become in occultism. In occultism, there are these more mystic fascinations with coming to embody the tulpa, this created persona, actually becoming a person in the world or gaining a certain degree of density or material body. This is a question of what substantiates and how these tulpas are created. But here we can earnestly ask a handful of questions. How are these tulpas created? Meaning, are they simply something that is made up by the person, or are they something called forward by the person from a different source of being? And in that, we can also begin to question how we were sourced and how we came into being, whether certain attributes were desired and then we just ran with it. but also what is the distinction between the Tolpa and the concept of spirit in animism or in religions across the world. There are plenty of accounts to substantiate when these Tolpas take form, they looked ghastly. They take on the form of spirits. They have a kind of liminal presence about them, half embodied, somewhat unembodied apparitions. A subsequent question then is that can people unintentionally or collectively create Tolpas? Can we accidentally, through our subconscious amalgam, substantiate a ghost or substantiate a haunted space? This is something that we'll tend to later. But for context, the Tolpa is viewed to exist in the astral or in the psychic planes. Accordingly, their relationship to this world is passive at best, other than being invited into the body in the conventional way that this is interpreted. This is, in fact, a force ghost, so to speak. The Theosophists would earnestly question when this occurrence has affected history. They noticed that certain Gnostic sects described Jesus in the way that they would describe Tolpas, in that, is Jesus actually fully embodied, or is Jesus an emanation of the Creator? This idea of emanation as extension out from a source. This was an earnest question in that day and age. Was Jesus human? Or in this case, the belief would be, no, he is emanation, a thought form personified or given a concretized body or appearance. In the burning times, there was some concern that witches would create apparitions. This, quote, sorcery would be sourced from ancient animistic practices. We can see this in Finland, and we can see this in the greater Nordic culture. This haltia and etenainen concept. These are documented occurrences of people's apparitions preceding their arrival somewhere. Say someone is on a long journey and nobody knows that they're arriving there. But before they show up, say a week, a month, there is a vestige of their appearance that comes to bear for those who are more attuned. This person's determination to arrive to this place gives a sort of hint of an apparition. In a much more subtle sense, this is you knowing that somebody is going to call before they call. This is someone coming to your mind that you haven't thought of in a long time that is about to meet you again. We can speculate as to the nature of this phenomena, but we should observe very blatantly that whether it's Tolpas for Tibet or for occultism or for folk religions or for animism and shamanism, this is not something that is distinct, and its exotic factor is purely up to those that are utilizing this ancient knowledge. And with Tibet and with occultism, there is a certain degree of warning that comes along with practicing this process of Tolpa creation, in that they are very tricky to get rid of once they are made. In the same way as it can be very tricky to expel a presence from a home once it is hard baked into it. The etymology of Tolpa is emanation. And so we should begin to question, what is the nature of emanations? But let's flip this around first. Let's consider the golem. This is Jewish mysticism, but more accurately, to my mind, Jewish folklore. If Adam was made from clay in the beginning and was given life through the breath, would we not then be able to imitate this process? So as opposed to creating a person first and then the density coming later, we can instead get the density or the body and then put a person into it. Of course, this has a wily historical account. Is this reliable? Is that creature, if created successfully, going to be an abomination, a truncated self? This is Frankenstein's monster as an instance, but in Jewish folklore, technically speaking, the first golem is Adam. The first man is a golem. Any potential mistake in this practice would be done because we are imitating the creator. The etymology of the word golem could be thought to be a shapeless mass or a light body. They are animated by a sacred charm or a sacred word. And so the word being breath and spirit, breathing, air, spirit, respiration. Thus, we can use the word or the charm to animate the shapeless mass. Now, I want to point out something strange here. The nature of brainwashing, the Manchurian Candidate being triggered by a phrase. This is attempting to make a person a golem, to rip out their innate emanation, their innate self, and to replace it with an artificial one. The presence of this folklore is not strange by any stretch of the imagination. A very brief comparative mythological study into how many creation stories of man take clay to do so, or take mud to do so. For instance, in Egypt, one of the creator deities, Khnum, made man out of clay. He was a potter, or a demiurge, a crafter of material, medium. This is to say, in the ancient belief that the body is created first, is given shape first, and then whatever we want to call it, the emanation, the spirit, the Tolpa, the persona, is then put into the being. This certainly could be an intriguing commentary on the nature of development in utero. So here we've seen two different means towards the same end, so to speak. One that makes the body first and puts the emanation in, or one that creates the emanation or invites the emanation, and then somehow the body later becomes. But this whole subject certainly goes a step further than this. If there is profundity about what we do individually, then there is certainly something profound about what we do collectively. And this is the egregore. If thoughts are things, and many people come together, consciously or unconsciously, to further perpetuate or further empower an idea, this is an egregore. To state plainly, a political party, for example, a club, a movement, so forth, these are not things that you can grab. They do not exist in a physical sense. They are apparent in their existence because of this egregore nature. Many people have come together to say that this is a thing, and thus it is, but it is not physical. In this way, these egregores, or these amalgams, do not exist of their own right. If people did not speak to them, if they did not perpetuate them, they would not exist. They would wane away. A more straightforward illustration of this. If in our town we have the local mountain, on one hand, we could all get together, consciously or unconsciously, and say that this mountain was put together, made manifest by geological forces and tectonic actions. That would give the mountain said perception. But if instead we had a creation story about this great battle or of this great hero that became concretized as a memorial to them, then this mountain means something very different. It has a sort of ancestral, mythic presence. Now, the truth of the matter about what this mountain is purely up to the collective. The truth is a perpetuation that we all agree on. So right away, there is an open question of what we ought to do with the egregore, so to speak. But before discussing this further, let's divulge its etymology and its historical precedence, because the word egregore is coming from Greek, and it means to watch or the watcher. To be awake or to watch implies an independent existence of this egregore. The first reference of the history of this term, one points to the Book of Enoch. The watchers, or the luminaries, or the angels that came down from heaven, mated with women, and corrupted the earth. By proxy, this term Gregorio, which also would be the root of the name Gregory, by the way, could also be traced to Genesis 6:2. So here we should take note that if this is the case, then angels are in fact egregores. And if angels are egregores, then that means there is something to say about mutual belief bringing about the existence of said angels. Transliteration of this term back into Hebrew brings about a root for the term city. A city as an egregore. Again, amalgam. The idea of a city is nothing more than an amalgam. Athens as a city, Athena, is a deity. All too often in the ancient past, there were tutelary spirits, the spirit of a city, that being this distinctive ambience of this particular place. That is not something that can be replicated anywhere else in the world. This distinctive ambience that we all consciously or unconsciously create is the egregore, or is the tutelary spirit. Accordingly, if occultists are connecting these watchers to the egregore, then it also is the case for the Anakim, or the Nephilim, these mysterious giants in the Bible, in fact being amalgams, or these egregores. And sincerely, this is an intriguing take. In our modern day, these giants, by this allegory, by this comparison, would be like the corporations. Mindless, autonomous, a will that supersedes any individual human will, and is bigger than all of us, is mightier, and would seemingly need a divine intervention in order to quell, in order to expel. And thus, in that apocrypha, the flood is created in order to expel these giants, these watchers, these Nephilim, these Anakim. But let's step out of the referential and do some reflection on this instead. Like attracts like. And if enough people think on the same thing, this is believed to aggregate in some sort of way. And this aggregation is an egregore. It's kind of poetic how similar those terms are. So in this then, it's very important what we perpetuate. An ancient, almost taboo spiritual wisdom is hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. Accordingly, to see, to hear, to acknowledge these things furthers their existence in your mind. Garbage in, garbage out sort of a thing. If you want to get biblical with this again, then these are the things that ought to be done with the Spirit. Love, kindness, grace, beauty, so forth. These are the things that should be done with the word. These are the things that you should think on. These are the things that you should speak on. Thus also the older phrase of speaking of the devil. If you're just talking about somebody, right, and then they appear, it's rather uncanny. To name something is to summon it. To think on something is to perpetuate it. So in this vein, the devil is an egregore. The Grim Reaper is an egregore. But so is the Easter Bunny. And so is Santa Claus. Earnestly, I think we should ask, and I know this is silly, but what is Santa? Santa is not the inspiration of the character of St. Nicholas. Santa is an amalgam, a creation. But this amalgam, this creation, this thought form, this non-physical entity has a physical effect on this world, is personified, is perpetuated in the same sort of way as an ancient deity would be. So in this way, it's not necessarily belief that creates the egregore. We don't all have to believe in order for it to be, but we all have to consistently consent. We all have to consistently allow and perpetuate, name, or consider it. So it should be very apparent at this point that angels and demons are of our own creation in this way, or at the very least are of our own perpetuation, if we don't believe that they have some sort of sourcing of themselves. This is to sincerely ask, are they independent in their existence, and would these aspects exist of their own right without perpetuation? Or are they egregores? Are they completely dependent on people's perpetuation? Another curious historical account of this egregore phenomena is Baphomet. Certain cultists have interpreted the Knights of Templar inventing this character to represent the idea of the egregore. Not some misunderstanding, not some allusion to the devil, but in fact, this is the representation of this very subject that we've been discussing. As a greater distillation, if one walks into an old building, there is an innate sense, there is an innate ambience about what that old building entails, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. This is an amalgam of people's experiences in this space. This group consciousness can be weak or it can be strong. That completely depends on how much it has been perpetuated. Our organization as humans naturally produce these group thinks. We should come to observe how these, quote, group thinks come to possess people. When somebody is a political leader, they are not necessarily a human. They are a representative of this groupthink, of this egregore, of this intangible collective idea. So in this way, that person is possessed by this entity. In another frame of thinking, if we just tinge this in the religious sense, then this is possession, where something outside of oneself comes to possess them. The only true distinction here is the orientation. Political is appropriate, religious is strange and scary. But this subject matter is very boundary dissolving. There are several reasonable questions that come from this with how expansive this whole field is, in that, for instance, is culture an egregore? Are what we call the fundamental laws of nature in fact a collective consent that perpetuates it and makes it appear as though it is an unnegotiable constant of reality? Are archetypes self-evident and self-sourced, or are they amalgams from our ancestry that have been built up to such a point that they appear as though they are hard-baked into reality? In spite of what these initiations or these secret societies might wish to instill or wish to teach, There is an earnest question here of radical subjectivity or objectivity. Are these things of themselves? Or is this all in our heads? Is everything that in fact appears real actually imaginal? And this imaginal, once given enough credo from each individual being, eventually becomes such a monstrous thing that it is given the designation of being an objective, unnegotiable facet of nature. But let's get back on the ground. Let's take all that we've introduced and make some distillations from it. Let's reintroduce the introductory question. What is a thought? By this lineage, a thought is spirit. That thought is a building block of reality. If that thought is given away, it turns into a structure. Kindness, as an example, is not tangible. We can't go out and grab it. Yet it speaks through people. People come to embody this invisible attribute. We all participate in an invisible plane. This is not hooey. This is not woo-woo stuff. If you and I have a conversation, there is literally the act of vibrations moving through the air. There is a matter of the material things happening, the throat undulating, so forth. But perceptively, but invisibly to us, there is another level of that conversation, something that is happening emotively. We are stepping over each other, or we are meeting a genuine union, and there is a degree of solidarity that is felt there, or that there is an ideological debate happening. It's almost as though a structure is being formed by the mutual critique of two various parties. There are intangible things happening in the midst of what otherwise is interpreted as a mundane event. Say in this conversation I have a reoccurring loyalty to a given subject. Say for instance that I'm insistent that this individual gives more into their impulses, gives more into that let go kind of philosophy. If we were in another day and age, or if we were with a different group of people, then this would be interpreted as Dionysian, as though I'm speaking to or embodying the essence of Dionysus. Spirit is breath, breath is word. Our words are not a matter of logic as much as they are of conveyance and illusion. We are all inconsistent devotees to different principles, so to speak. I want to take this space to comment on the do this to manifest abundance, do such and such to attract wealth people. This idea. This, to me, always rings like the prosperity gospel does, where you're using a spiritual faculty towards an aim that is ultimately selfish. In sincerity, these aims tend to always be pointed towards capital or towards personal greed or personal affluence. These goals that people wish to further are for themselves, regardless of any implications on others. Our culture or our collective egregore celebrates people for their success in how much money they gain, regardless of the means of which they use to gain that wealth. There is no question as to what this wrought upon the world. The question here isn't of the power to manifest or the law of attraction. That's not the issue. The issue is the idea, the spirit, or the dream that is at the center of that manifestation. That thing of which you're willing to attract or you're wishing to attract. My statement here is that what you are choosing to attract is not simply just affecting you. It is affecting the collective, the egregore of it all. It is affecting the culture. It is affecting the future in this way. And this is why the ancients were very concerned about this spiritual warfare kind of stuff. They were concerned because they knew if people went the wrong way, it would ruin this whole reality for all of us. When you say things like, that's just the way it is, or if I didn't do this job, somebody else would, this is condoning, this is perpetuating, it is voting with your dollar, so to speak. The bounds of our creativity here, the bounds of what we can do with these emanations, with this manifestation, is truly beyond our imagination. And the fact that it looks the way that it does isn't an issue of the powers that be, it's an issue of what we do with the medium. By this vantage point, we've just simply lost the plot. And this isn't a matter of everybody must do as I do. This is a matter of you voice what you want to voice. You perpetuate what you wish to perpetuate, and you don't speak to that of which you don't wish to perpetuate. While a lot of this subject matter, Tolpas, Egregores, Golems, have this exotic, strange, and occult flair about it, in truth, this is very mundane. This is very everyday. This is not something that some secret group of people are solely invested in and interested in working with. This is something that we are all invested in and that we are all working with. A fundamental definition of magic in the esoteric, arcane, occult traditions is the power of will and the will's ability to bend reality. And so then the question is what to do with your will. What will you do with it? But regardless of where we sway on this matter, whether we need to take it dreadfully seriously or whether this has all been an irrelevant kind of overly pontificating sort of speech, we are in a sea of other people's dreams. We are in a sea of other people's wills. And we have our own agency in this. We have our own contribution to this collective sea and this collective will. And although it's so easy for us to feel like we are caught in that sea, being washed around, it is everybody's collective motions that create these greater forces that come to bear. What we think, what we will, and what we believe have a tangible effect on reality. This world seems starved of good ideas, of new good ideas. And this world is starved of the mutual unselfish will that it would take to manifest those new good ideas. To dream a good dream means that we need a good mission. We need a new dream.
Have you noticed how everything becomes distorted and unreal as the mind tries to escape into time? And in dreams it escapes, too. Not always in the fantasy. Sometimes the dreams come true.
The Spiritual Studies course is an effort towards free public education on matters of spirituality, religion, and comparative mythology. If you enjoyed this session, it is in thanks to those that have given their emanations in order to manifest an actual financial sustainability for making this course. And that is done through the Buy Me Coffee link in the description box below. A one-time contribution, buying me a coffee, helps to support buying a book for research to further the course, to help get this sort of information out there in earnest. Benefits for membership include early access to these sessions, updates on these sessions, and commentaries, additional information on the given subject matters. Again, a thank you in earnest to those that have put in the extra effort to help this continue. With all that said, stay curious and keep wondering.